Hey, what up, though? Greetings, good morning, good afternoon. How are you? Welcome. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Human Butterfly Effect podcast. I am your host, RDW, introducing myself to some and reintroducing myself to others. I'm so happy that you guys are here. This is our first episode, and I can't wait to get started. Let's do it. Yes, once again, welcome to the Human Butterfly Effect podcast with RDW. Again, I am your host, and I welcome you all with open arms for being here. Thank you so much for joining me. It is a pleasure to have you with me on my very first inaugural kickoff episode of this podcast. Now, in case you're wondering, what the heck is a human butterfly effect? Well, to understand what I mean or what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast, let's first revisit what a butterfly effect is. Now, you've probably seen the movie or heard of it. You've probably heard of this term before, but do you actually know what it means? In its simplest terms, it's about chaos and change. Or we might even say chaos, choices, and outcomes. The butterfly effect is about how when you make a change, how it can have a catastrophic effect. Sometimes the change or the effect is so drastic, it's positive. Sometimes it's negative. But in its simplest terms, it's just about change and outcomes. In fact, if you look at the butterfly, and I'm no expert on butterflies, I do love butterflies, by the way, but I'm no expert. But feel free to Google this if you want to fact check what I'm saying. And I strongly encourage you all to do that. But a butterfly, we look at it when it's flapping its wings in the summer and it's in our gardens and it's around our flowers and it's the most beautiful, serene, peaceful thing. In fact, I've never met a human being who didn't like a butterfly. I'm sure there's someone out there somewhere that don't like butterflies, but generally we like them because they're visually appealing. And when we see butterflies, it tends to make you feel good or put a smile on your face. But the process of what it takes to get to that point is chaotic. Now, I read up a little bit on it. Again, I'm not an expert, so please don't be upset if I bumble or jumble this up. But from my understanding, there's some larva that comes from a plant, and that plant creates this caterpillar. And over time, that caterpillar begins to eat the plant or eat this larva that it was birthed from. And that creates this cocoon effect. And then it's in the cocoon for so many days or whatever. And then you have this beautiful butterfly. When I read about it, it sounded absolutely disgusting. It's not a good process. It's kind of like, as they say, making sausage. It's an ugly process, it's a chaotic, transformative process, but it leads to a beautiful outcome. And so, in essence, that's where the butterfly effect gets its name. And when we talk about the human butterfly effect, I'm essentially talking about the same thing, but I'm talking about us, people, transforming and making changes that lead to our desired outcome. So, that's what I hope to achieve with this podcast. It is my humble prayer that that I touched the hearts and minds of my listeners. I hope that you learned something. And I hope that you're able to go back into your respective environments and share that information with others. That is my hope. So let's get started. I want to ask you guys a question as we get started. I want to ask you a real simple question. I want to know, at what age, at what age or life event do you think one arrives? In other words, when you get this particular age or when you reach this particular status, what is that? What age, what status is that when you have arrived or you have stopped growing or evolving or transforming? When do you think that is? I'm gonna give you a few seconds to think it through, excuse me. Think it through. Do you think you arrived once you are 21, you're an adult? When you have children? What about when your children graduate and leave the home? Have you arrived? What about when you go to school and you get that advanced degree? You have a PhD now. Have you arrived? How about when you buy your first home or your first car? What about when you get married? You've arrived then, right? There's nothing else to do or learn about life for yourself, right? What about when you hit that 800 credit score? You know, that perfect credit score everybody's striving for. Or you get that Benz. Or you can pay your house or your car off in cash. Have you arrived? What do you think? If you said any of those things, you're wrong. Guess when you arrive? Never. As long as you have breath in your body, you will continue growing, transforming, or you may be stagnated and stay the same. Now, let me just tell you, if you're not growing, if you're not learning, if you're not utilizing your time on this earth to make yourself and those around you better, you're essentially a zombie to me. You're a dead person walking because that's what zombies are. That's not what life is about. And when we look at the world we live in today, a lot of us are anxious, we're angry, some are happy. But for those of us who's a little confused, I've talked to several people. I'm sure you've seen the news and whatnot of all the chaos that's going on in the world. And some of us are fearful. Not only are we fearful, we're clueless. We're like, oh my goodness, the world is going mad. What happened? But the truth is, this is the world you've pretty much always lived in. This these things that are happening in our community and in around our homes, they are not new. In fact, I would concede that it is America's blueprint. Let me give you a little history real briefly on America, okay? Have you ever heard of these terms? American imperialism. What about the manifest destiny? Have you ever heard that? I'm sure you have if you are a faith filled person. They always talk about manifesting things. I'm sure you've heard those words before, but do you know where they came from and what they originally meant? American imperialism is an ideal. It's an ideal that if you're white and if you're American, you are better than others. It is an ideal that if you are white and you are American, you are entitled to certain things that others are not. One of which, there are many, is land. Do you really know how this country was made? Now, I know a lot of you are thinking about slavery, and we're going to touch on that in just a second, but I want to take you back to the 1800s. specifically in 1821. Did you know that Mexico used to be part of the United States? It declared itself free from its mother country of Spain, and it stretched all the way from Guatemala to Oregon. That's how big it was. If you look at the map over there where Texas is now, in that area, that used to be Mexico. Right now, we have 50 states in the United States, I believe. But when we were building this country, we did not have all this land. Now, some of this land was vacant and available, and the Americans, based on the American imperialism ideal or manifest destiny, they're interchangeable terms. That's how they acquired some of the land. But in Mexico, which was again a part of America, they own that land. The problem was, even though they owned that land, it was empty. They didn't have the tools or the resources to build up the land. And so what they did was they invited some of the American settlers to that land to help them cultivate it. Now, this is a little different from slavery because, as I mentioned, they were invited. The Americans were invited, the settlers at that time were invited to that land by the Mexicans, and they wanted them to come in and help them cultivate this land and build it up. And the Americans went on over there and they settled. And then after a while, they said, you know what? You should just give us this land. In fact, this is no longer Mexico. This is part of the United States. Why? Based on American imperialism, based on that manifest destiny term that I talked about. We are Americans, we are white, we want this land, you're going to give it to us. But those at the time that were in Mexico, they really didn't, they wasn't down with that. And so that is what we know of today as the war, the 1846 war that the United States had with Mexico. They fought over that territory and obviously they acquired that land. What I want you to grasp or hold on to from that is that American imperialism, the manifest destiny term, is an ideal. It's not a fact. It wasn't a law. It was an idea. It was an ideal that built this country. And if you pay attention, this country was pretty much not only was built, but it exists off ideals. Ideals become laws, principles, and policies, and they govern the country that we live in, not only back in the 1800s, but today. Now, put that in perspective. Let's break it down. Let's make it simplistic. You over there in your home, you paying the rent, or maybe you own your home and you don't have nothing in it. And you don't have the resources to build up your house. You have nothing. And you invite your friend over who needs a place to stay, but they got stuff to fill your house with. They got furniture, they got appliances, they have food or whatever you might need. And they come on over, so it seems like a legitimate barter, right? They need a place to stay or settle. You have the place, but you don't have the resources to build it up. That person come on in and y'all all good for a minute and they say, you know what, you should just give me this house. Give me your apartment. Give me your land. Why? Because I'm an American. I'm superior to you. So give it to me. Come on now. Any one of us would be like, what in the world are you talking about? How dare you? The audacity that you're going to take something that belongs to someone else based on an idea. Now, follow me. That was in the 1800s. You know what else was an idea? Slavery. Now, let me open your eyes to slavery. A lot of people think slavery was about race, and race certainly played a part in it. I personally believe slavery was about money and power. Kind of relates to this American imperialism ideal and also the war that United States had with Mexico, because it was the same concept. When the Americans came over here and they settled in this land and they sought to build it up, they had money. They had power, they had prestige. They didn't have the resource or the knowledge to cultivate the land. That's where slavery came into play. Slaves. That's why slaves were brought from other areas, because they had knowledge. They knew how to grow crops, they knew how to plant, harvest crops. Why is that important? Because that was a huge source of economic revenue for America. And they used that money to venture off into other things. And as we know, America has since built up and we have all these other streams of revenue. But this is how it started, off an idea. Why is that important? Because when you look at the world today, a lot of us, as I mentioned, are just in awe of what's going on. But what's going on today was going on 100 years ago, was going on 500 years ago. The problem is we think we have arrived. We've been distracted because we got these degrees and we got these homes and we got these cars and we got this good job with this nice title and we got us a man or we got us a woman or we got us whatever, all these things. And we think we have arrived and we've forgotten basically where we came from. That's why a lot of us are shocked. And I encourage you, and I strongly encourage you to fact check what I'm saying to you because they teach this in the history books to our children. The problem is they teach this when they're in the third grade, when they're in the fourth grade. They teach this to kids that have no concept of what life is about. They're children. So, do you think they understand anything that I just said? Do you think they even care? Of course not. Not when you're in the third and fourth grade. I dare you right now, go in your child's bedroom and get their history book. I dare you next time you go to parent teacher conference, ask them, can you borrow a history book? I dare you when you go over your friends and family house, if you don't have kids, to ask them for a history book. And you turn to the back of the book in the index and you look up some of those terms I just taught you about: American imperialism and manifesting destiny and this war. And you will find out that what I just shared with you is absolute fact. Absolutely. It's the blueprint for how America was built. And if you look at it today in 2025, it's still the blueprint for how powerful people are making their lane in this country, whether it's in business or entertainment or whatever faucet that you want to go down. I'm not trying to suggest everyone has this attitude, but it certainly is a mainstream concept. I would be remiss without leaving you today. It is Black History Month, and I am a woman of color. I am also a published author and a writer. And one of the historic elements that really influences me was the Harlem Renaissance era. Have you ever wondered why they don't teach about that in school? Just something to think about. The Harlem Renaissance era was one of the most significant periods not only for blacks, but in American culture. You have to understand, prior to the Harlem Renaissance era, slavery was legal and blacks were used as slaves. They had no independence. The only thing they were known for was as a slave. When slavery ended, the blacks began to migrate north because the north was more advantageous for economic opportunities. That's where you have the big three and the manufacturing and automotive industries because they hired black people. But keep in mind, during that time frame, we're talking the early 1900s, even though slavery had ended, racism was still rampant. And you had almost, they say, some say it was almost a million. I say it was around quarter million. We'll split the baby and say about 500,000 people migrated from the South to the North to start a new life. But let's kind of put that in concept. They were slaves, which means they owned nothing, they had nothing. The only thing that they could rely on was the gifts and the talents and the resources that they had from within. And a lot of them use that to not only build their lives, but to influence a culture and a generation that we still embody today. Do you like jazz music? The Harlem Renaissance era birthed that. Some of the famous greats, we think about literacy and we think about like Zora Hurston and Langston Hughes. We think about those poets, Countee Cullen, W.E.B. Du Bois. We think about those people and we think about their literary efforts, but the Harlem Renaissance was also about the arts. And it also was the first time in American history that America as a whole was introduced to the culture of Black people. Understand, they did not know anything about Blacks per se, other than they were slaves. When I think about the Harlem Renaissance era, I think about the chaos that could have ensued or was ensuing as they were making that great migration. They probably were fearful of their lives. They had no idea where they were going to live or what they were going to do for work or food, shelter, clothing. All they knew, they were going northward to try to make a better life for themselves. And they did that. And they relied solely on their God given talent and abilities. Remember, this is the 1900s, so they didn't have cars. They didn't drive from the south to the north. I don't really know how they got there. I don't know if they rode horses, they hitchhiked, they could have walked. The point that I'm trying to make is the chaos, the choice, the change, and the outcome. What does any of that have to do? What am I talking about? What is she talking about? She's talking about American imperialism. She's talking about Harlem Renaissance. She's talking about the Mexican United States War. I'm not connecting the dots. What I'm telling you is that this world, specifically the United States, was cultivated out of chaos. If you look in our history, anybody that was great, that made something of themselves, particularly if they were a person of color or a woman, it started with chaos. Remember in the beginning of this podcast, I talked about how a butterfly is made and how ugly the process is, but something beautiful comes out of it in the end. That's what life is really all about for us all. We can't get discouraged with chaos. Somebody said once that God is not in the midst of chaos. I strongly disagree. If you read the word, not only is God there in the midst of chaos, he says according to his word, he is a very present help in the time of trouble. And so, what I want to leave you with today, instead of being anxious, instead of being discouraged, instead of being angry, I want you to look at your own life, look at your own set of circumstances, and what changes can you make in the midst of the chaos that will lead to a better outcome? If slaves could do it who had nothing and really nobody but each other, why can't we do it? If America could do it, they built a whole nation on chaos. Right or wrong, good or bad, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is we too can do great things in the midst of a storm. In fact, that's where most transformation that means anything takes place. It's in your darkest days, it's in your darkest moments, it's in those whirlwind of experiences or vortexes, if you will, when something beautiful is birthed. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you go throughout your week, as you think about what's going on in our respective communities. Fear is both a liar and a thief. Don't grab hold on to that. Don't even get caught up in the process. Just keep moving forward and find a way that you can make a change. It could just be a change in your attitude. It could just be a change in your perspective. It could just be a change in how you go about obtaining information or verifying information. It could be a small change, just starting your day with a positive thought. One of the changes I've made this year, and I found this online. I don't know where I found it, but it's not something I created. I want to emphasize that, but I want to share it with you as we end this recording. Glad. Every day, be grateful for something, learn something, achieve or accomplish something, and finally, delight in something. That's how you should live your day. I've been doing that as a New Year's resolution, if you will, for the month of January, and has worked and has put things in perspective. So I encourage you to grab hold to that and maybe make your own little tweaks. But every day, be grateful for something. Learn something. If not about you, about someone else, about your world, about your job, about your kids, about your household. It doesn't even have to be anything major or deep, but learn. That's how you keep growing. Achieve something, accomplish something. It might just be cleaning out your car. You know, your car been dirty for months. Clean it out. Might just be taking your dog for a walk. You know that dog been sitting there crying and you ain't spent no time with it. What about making a change and spend some time with your pets? Or maybe spend some time with your kids or your parents or your grandparents. Maybe spend a little time with yourself. And lastly, delight in something. You know, life is too hard to work, work, work all the time. Sometimes you got to press and sometimes you got to reset and rest and do it again tomorrow. So, on that note, I want to thank you guys for joining me. I hope that you learned something today. I hope that I made sense to you all today. I do want to give you a quick reminder. We have a special guest for our next episode. So, be sure to turn in. I'm not going to tell you who it is because I want you guys to come back. But our next guest or next episode, we will have a very special guest. I look forward to seeing you guys then. Take care. Bye for now.